everyone, welcome to Big Scene Small Cities. We're a podcast about building a better community for music in a small community. This video we're talking with Dave Bennett and Fairleigh Gilmour, who are both advocates for the live music scene in Dunedin. We cover heaps of stuff from music, how it was in Melbourne a few years ago, issues around liquor licensing and nighttime culture, the benefits of music in a community in general, DIY culture, how do we communicate our gigs, sound control, and our unsung heroes in a small community. So we hope you enjoy it, and please like and subscribe and give us your comments. Thank you so much for coming on, Dave and Fairleigh. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. So first of all, I just wanted to get an idea about who you guys are and where you're from and maybe some of the history that you've had of music. Why do you love it so much?
Yeah, so we moved here 6 years ago.
Almost 7.
Almost 7 years ago from Melbourne, and we met when we worked at the Noise Bar in Melbourne. So I was already playing in bands there, and Dave was a sound engineer. And so, yeah, I moved here for work and took him with me. So that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, and same thing. I worked originally at the bar with Fairleigh. That's where I kind of learnt to mix. I went through there one day with one of my mates' bands who I just used to hang out with because I couldn't play instruments and they played punk music and I wanted to be involved. So I'd kind of self-taught myself how to do sound. And then I rolled through this bar one day and mixed them there. And then they were like, "Hey, do you want a job?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you mean I can do this like for money?"
Yes.
And people will pay me. I was just doing this because I like bands and I kind of...
Free tickets to all the gigs you want to go to.
Yeah, basically. And then I rolled from there on to working around all the venues in Melbourne. I eventually worked my way into being the production manager of a 5,500 seat theatre that was attached to the convention centre there. So I was head of all things production coming in and out of that place. And then I left there and went to Federation Square where I was the head of audio, which is the main square in the middle of Melbourne.
Amazing.
And then Fairleigh had done such a awesome job at basically taking care of most of the other things in our life that were important. Well, I did this extreme gallivanting workload through I was the production manager of the Prince Band Room as well for a while there. That when she got a job offer over here and it was time to kind of go for somewhere for her career, we were like, yeah, hell yeah, let's go.
Time to balance it out.
Time to go to New Zealand and see what's up.
To be honest, I didn't think that we weren't planning to stay for that long. We thought it would only be a couple of years and then I would look for jobs back in Australia. But it turns out that we really love it here, and I think we partly love it because of the music scene and how awesome it is for such a small place to have such a good music scene. So now we're staying for good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what got you into music, Fairleigh? Because you started off as a musician, but then you're working at the university? Yeah,
I've got a PhD in criminology.
Right.
So I've always just made music for fun. I've always just been in bands that play at pubs and stuff. I started playing when I was 14 because my brother had a band and they couldn't find a drummer. So he persuaded mum and dad somehow to get me a secondhand drum kit. And I had an older cousin who played for a metal band and he kind of showed me how to play a bit. So ever since then.
And you're self-taught entirely?
No, I had a few lessons when I was in high school, but mostly self-taught.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right. And you're still playing in Dunedin as well at the moment? A couple of bands you're in?
Yes, I'm playing in 2 bands. I'm also playing I've been making music with my daughter.
Cool.
Because she's really into the bass right now. So that's our daughter. So that's going really well. And I play percussion for the Kaikarai Brass Band.
Oh, right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Busy woman. You only get around that. Okay, awesome. So if we just kind of go back and think about your time, and granted we're talking 6 to 10 years ago probably, in your time in Melbourne, working the music scenes or being around the music scene in Melbourne. Can you tell us a little bit about what Melbourne was like then as a music scene? Because us over here, it's pretty notorious that Melbourne has a very strong, a very vibrant and very diverse music scene and an art scene in general, I think. And I guess if I I have a little trifecta theory about how the cities work between New Zealand and Australia, and I think from someone who is from Dunedin, we think of a graduation point between going, okay, arts-wise, we're going Dunedin, and then you might graduate to Wellington, and then you go to Melbourne, where contrary, you might be, okay, if you're Christchurch, you're going Auckland, and then you're going Sydney. So I just thinking like culturally speaking in terms of their art scenes there, what was Melbourne like at the time, and what are some of the things that Melbourne did really, really well?
Yeah, Melbourne's awesome. It still is awesome by all accounts. I think one of the greatest assets Melbourne and Melbourne's music scene has is that they have a lot of basically what are high streets. So your suburbs will have particular roads that run through them, which is typically where all the bars used to be from way back when. And all those old hotels are all clustered together on the main thoroughfares. And a lot of them in most suburbs have converted into venues of some sort. And they create these entire districts where music is ever present in that, like Sydney Road in Brunswick, or Brunswick Street in Fitzroy, or Bridge Road in Richmond, or down the Esplanade in St Kilda. Like these routes all the way through are just speckled with venues, like all along it, of all sizes, of all ilks, and they've all got their own kind of diehard little fans who follow the bars and the bar scenes more than they do specifically the artists that are there.
Interesting. Yep.
Which means a lot of times that you turn up, if you're just going to go to the Brunswick Hotel, you don't even check who's playing on a Friday. You're just like, oh, we're going to the Brunswick and there'll be bands on later.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to the Evelyn or a bar open over in Fitzroy or an old bar.
Yeah.
But some of them do develop little scenes around them.
Do you think they, like people who are like punters who are going to these places, they're going there because it serves live music, or is there other things involved, do you think?
100% the music.
Right.
A lot of those bars are based just solely around the music happening, but that in itself creates a
culture and a
culture and a scene, and then people just love the bars as well.
I think the Tote would be one of the strongest examples of that. And you might have heard recently about the crowdfunding to buy the Tote and make sure it stays a live music venue. But that was one venue that has you would just go to the Tote and see what was on.
Can you tell us a bit about the Tote then and what they're going through? Because if crowds trying to buy it?
Or
what the Tote is it in Melbourne?
Tote's in Collingwood. Right near Fitzroy, Brunswick Street. It's in that same kind of whole region there. Yeah. The Tote's one of those kind of iconic bands, iconic venues of Melbourne in that, pretty much anyone could get a gig at the Tote for many, many years. Cool. It was your typical just divey music bar. There's not an inch of paint left that doesn't have someone's sticker on it.
Yeah, great.
The carpets are thing that half the PA was shot most of the time. It was... Yeah. But it
was great.
But it was just iconic. And many, many years ago, before the recent troubles that the Tote had, there was a change to the security laws in Victoria due to some violence on King Street, which is one of the areas where there's a lot of strip clubs. Okay. And there was a lot of violence that happened outside of there. And they made some pretty strong changes to the security laws for bars and clubs in Melbourne. And because a lot of these strip clubs had live DJs and these other venues had bands, basically they came under the same liquor licensing. So they required them to up the amount of security guards drastically to a point. And for the Tote was great, but on Monday nights they still had, the starter bands playing, and they'd bring their mates and the other bands and they'd all drink the Rider, and, Tuesdays there wouldn't be that many people there, and they were really living on their Friday, Saturday night, big nights to get them through.
Right.
But when you added that security cost to all their other nights, it was no longer going to be viable. And that sparked basically the Don't Kill live music rallies throughout the city, where everybody marched. We had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people march down the middle of the city to the steps of Parliament to protest these changes to the laws affecting their music venues. And
because it meant even if you just had a singer-songwriter, you had to have a security guard.
Yeah.
You had to have a security guard at the door and then one watching the performance area as well.
In terms of staffing as well, right. Yeah.
And that covered every bar in Melbourne. There was a point there, and I don't know if I should say this on documentary, I guess the bar doesn't run anymore, where in I was the sound guy at the noise bar, and the owner was upstairs all the time, and we did the same kind of thing where we'd have, Monday, Tuesday nights, there'd be nobody there, stuff like that, but we'd still put on like singer-songwriters and stuff like that. But we had to get security licenses so that if licensing turned up, we could call him to come down from upstairs real quick.
Right.
And pretend he'd been in the bathroom, and I could get my security license out from behind the sound desk and walk away from the desk and say that I was the security guard.
Yes. So there's a lot of these sorts of, I think, well-intentioned bylaws that are often treating symptoms of problems. And I think that some of the overriding themes we're finding with a lot of bars that are struggling across different communities is that bylaws and laws come through with the intention to treat a problem that has arisen, usually about safety, usually about, and ideally, primarily, I think it comes down to safety. It's about, whether alcohol overconsumption or just fights or violence or things like that in an area where it's late at night, things can get volatile and you need to have your bases covered in that respect. And I think there's a lot of those kinds of discussions being had about trying to ensure the safety of people, because if we're not all safe while we're doing this, then what's the point? But I think that's interesting that it's come up because, that discussion is continually being had in a lot of small communities about when we reach a certain point of a lot of people in one place, how do we manage the situation to make it safe for those people who are attending? So it's interesting that there's a perfect example of that in Australia, where a simple change in a law actually negatively affects an entire community for after that.
100%. And that was a while ago, that one. That was ages ago, actually. And then the most recent one was basically just the costs of the venue. I'm not 100% sure on all the details around all the contributing factors, but basically it ended up with the people who currently own the Tote having to sell it.
Yep.
And then the crowdfunding was to make sure that somebody bought it that would keep it the Tote. And the guys who actually organised the crowdfunding and are going to run it are Last Chance Rock and Roll Bar, who are another rock and roll bar in the inner city, who there's a lot of crossover crowd there. So they managed to spearhead and crowdfund a whole campaign of $3 million they raised.
Wow.
And they have raised it. So,
really?
Yep.
They raised $3 million to buy the building or the business I think they bought the whole building. Just to keep it as it is.
Right.
Because it means so much.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess the concept of crowdfunding, because it really does show the value that people put in a monetary way, value that people will donate and give to these things because they want it to continue to exist. But it's all still one-off thing. And if the and it's interesting you talk about it's never one thing, right? It's always a multitude of things that compound and make something unviable to continue on. Yeah. And I don't know, I've had conversations with people about we can save something by putting money into it one-off. And it's actually that doesn't really solve the problem in that respect. How can we... And the question should be about, well, let's use that money to keep things afloat for now, but we need to be looking forward in terms of what is the end game of our culture and venues that we want to remain, and how can we actually ensure that they will be able to continue being self-sufficient without needing this injection of donations, because people are going to lose it at any one stage, So that's really interesting that Melbourne has had those things. So if we did a little comparison between your experiences coming and being involved with the New Zealand the Dunedin music scene in particular, but probably the New Zealand music scene in general as well, what are your experiences in terms of the differences between Melbourne and here?
Do you want to go? You go.
That's okay.
There may be no different, it might just be kind of same fish, different pond.
No, it's definitely different. I would say that the broader industry in a lot of ways is a lot more, what's the best word for it? There's a lot more DIY stuff going on here. There's a lot more owner-operator, smaller company, not that there isn't that in Melbourne, but there's a definite ethos around the local sound guys and the areas and how different bars do different things, which I think is less present from my experience. But that also could have just been because I was focused primarily in one city. Yeah.
Because you got the ultimate difference between scale, like, you know, like if Dunedin were the size of Melbourne, would we have a similar scene? And I guess there's a ultimate conversation to be had about what, when a small fledgling music scene is starting out, is it naturally more DIY? And should, as a small community, should we be looking to support DIY ventures actively, as opposed to trying to develop a wider industry? Because I guess the industry comes out of the success of the DIY ventures, maybe? I don't know. I'm just...
Yeah. It's really hard with industry on the scale of a city the size of Dunedin's, especially when we have an abundance of some things and then a lack of others. And we find that really hard, especially me working for a local production company here, in the fact that we tend to, at times of year, have a huge amount of gigs and not enough people in that thing. And very much in the same way, there's a lot of bands, there's not a lot of venues. And the fact that there's not a lot of venues means those venues don't have a lot of casual staff, which means there's not a lot of people casually involved in production, which knocks onto us in production companies who don't have access to casual production staff. So then we all end up, the people doing the sound and running around trying to make things happen end up flat out. And the bands end up screaming out for more. And the very limited people that are there are like, we can't even handle the amount we've got.
Yeah.
But that's what comes out of growing the scene is if you can create more opportunities for more people and more venues and more events, you naturally get more people looking at that as a viable kind of career path, or you know, even just a side hustle. You know what I mean? People who just do sound regularly on the side as a part of their, as opposed to their normal job. All that helps to like just allow the whole thing gather momentum. So scale is definitely there, but being of a scale that we are has some very particular problems in my...
So for clarification purposes, maybe we should talk a little bit about what you're doing in Dunedin, because you're both active in various different roles across the city. So Fairleigh, would you like to tell us a little bit about what your role is at the university in criminology? And then maybe you can talk a little bit about how you've been active with Save Dunedin live music and things like that.
Sure. So I'm a senior lecturer in criminology and gender studies at the university. And one of the things that my research has, there's actually two things that I'm interested in that actually kind of overlap with some of the work we do as Save Dunedin live music. So I have looked in the past at how laws have unintended consequences, particularly around nighttime economies and particularly around sex work in Australia.
Right.
But sometimes there's crossover in terms of like how the laws we're talking about, we think we're making things safer, but it can have really negative impacts for a series of people if we introduce bylaws or laws that are not well thought out. So that is an area that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, right.
I also look at performing arts in corrections and the enormous impact that music and theatre and dance have on people who've often experienced really difficult lives, and how amazing that can be for people.
And rehabilitative and you know, I've personally seen the positive results of having a vibrant community that is really connected and has a strong sense of community where people are more in tune to look after each other.
Absolutely. Well, so far my research certainly indicates that it has really amazing impacts on people in terms of their social connections and their feeling of connectedness, both to the people they make the music with, but also to their whānau, who they often, this gives them something really positive to talk about with people. And it has great individual impacts. It's a way of when we're performing and so on, there are some negative emotions in the sense that often we'll be like nervous or anxious and so on, but you get to deal with them in a way that's productive, and at the end you get to feel really good. So it's actually it's a really positive way to learn how to deal with some slightly unsettling emotions. But also people talk about the immense spiritual impact, and when I say like, why is it so amazing for you? People are always like, I can't even put that into words. It's something more than words, what music or drama and so on do for people. So when I see those amazing impacts, I'm always like, so we must want lots of this in our communities as well, so that, so those things are there for our young people, to do in the first place, which I know is,
and practice managing emotions and that emotional intelligence of being able to have an outlet for, if you're a punk singer screaming into a microphone and you get that one time a week when you actually just get to let loose, but to a positive response as opposed to a negative one.
Yeah.
It's really, really powerful to people. And Dave, you've been working with in a production company, and it's interesting. You talked about outside, about how actually a lot of your work isn't really based in Dunedin at the moment.
Yeah, no, we don't do nearly as much stuff here as we wish we could. I think there's the venues are in a bit of a state at the moment, in terms of access and in terms of the kind of events that can be staged in Dunedin, and that causes a lot of our work to actually just be out of town in other cities that are such as Invercargill, Queenstown. We're going to Gore. I'm going to Gore for a whole week in a few days to do.
Why is it that these cities? What is it about these cities that are providing more opportunities for your production company?
I think there's a lot more money being spent on community-based events, specifically in cases of like Invercargill and stuff like that. I think Queenstown's actually a bit more of a kind of destination event city as well. We don't have any real destination events or anything like that. We have one festival now, one large festival it's had its problems, but it seems to be finding its ground now.
Survived the COVID.
Basically, the venues in the city are at an inaccessible state. A lot of them don't have in-house equipment. A lot of them they have pretty large hiring fees, and you have to use particular ticketing companies and particular cleaning companies and all those.
This is in Dunedin? Right.
And these are all the things you got to, they clip the ticket wherever they can, and every single step of the way.
Ticket gets smaller and smaller, and walkaways less.
And for a lot of your mid-level touring shows and other kinds of people trying to get shows going in Dunedin, it limits you to either very small venues where you can do this stuff relatively cheaply, or just not at all, because you probably can't afford any of the middle of the road or bigger options that are around. So as a consequence, we end up either doing most of the work we do in Dunedin is corporate.
Yes.
Because they've got money.
Yeah.
And then big tours and stuff like that. But then for all your kind of medium stuff and...
Big tours being like Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Not even that big. Not even that big. No, more stuff that hits the town hall, like your Crowded Houses and George Thorogood and all those ones. Same kind of vein, but not quite as big as the Chili Peppers.
Stadium size. That's fun. All right. Okay, so revisiting the DIY scale between Melbourne and Dunedin, what were your thoughts on that, Fairleigh?
So in terms of how you said that it's kind of like Dunedin, Wellington, Melbourne, I actually feel that energy is very accurate. I think that there's something similar about those cities, and I think it's mostly like the real love of art, the wearing black and being a bit weird and being accepting of other people being a bit weird is really nice. But I actually think Dunedin, I have found the music scene in Dunedin particularly welcoming and particularly supportive. And I think that's partly related to a real DIY-ness about it. I think partly because of some of the limitations the scene has faced, people have forced to be really DIY. But I also think there's something a bit punk rock about Dunedin in the truest sense, like not necessarily punk music, but just that vibe, that commitment to making it work no matter what and supporting other people to make it work in a kind of anarchic way, but still making it work. So I do think it's specific about Dunedin, and it's partly related to size, but it's also just something awesome about Dunedin that I think we should love.
Yeah, and embrace. I totally empathise with that. Growing up in Dunedin, because I was in a 7-piece ska band who played poppy dancey music to girls, and we would book quite regular gigs with the heaviest of heavy metal, and like just because we just wanted variety and we liked the people in the music in the bands and things, so you'd end up having this really diverse night of music, but anyone who went along to those things would embrace it. And I think there was kind of an eclecticism there that was really I really loved.
Yes.
And I think it's something that is unique to the culture you talk about, where because you're all DIYing it, that's where the value's coming from, and people love to see people doing their own thing in their own way and supporting each other in that way. And I always found that, and I don't know whether this is still a thing, and maybe some people who are watching can enlighten me whether it is, but I always found there was, when I was going through music, that there was this unwritten rule that if you were performing that night, you needed to be there and stay, or be there early to see the bands before you, and you needed to stay for the bands after you.
Yes, always.
And you needed to support them in the same way that they supported you. Like everyone had bringing their own friends, so you actually are there to celebrate what everybody else is doing as well as what you are doing. And I don't know whether that's the case at the moment.
I think it is.
I hope it is.
I find it so true.
Yeah.
And with that kind of eclectic nature, I organised a gig the other night, and it was just all different, bands I like, but they were just all bands I like. So I hadn't really curated a kind of plan there. And I kind of realised on the night I had Catgut and Steel and Cuck next to each other. And the audience just loved both of them.
Great.
Back to back. And I just think that kind of energy where everyone's just yes.
Yeah.
To such different bands.
And being really open-minded to seeing and hearing something new.
Absolutely.
Having that and creating a culture where, you'll go to see one band, but actually you will listen and you'll enjoy three or whatever.
Definitely.
And I think that's something that still continually needs to be worked at and encouraged, because if we lose that, it becomes and we've talked about this in other interviews before, but a clickiness nature where the separation happens, and then all of a sudden you have a bar that only does punk rock, you have a bar that only does metal, you have a bar that does folky stuff like that, and actually. And sometimes, like you said before, people follow the venue. They go to the culture that the venue provides and enjoy the music that venue has on offer, as opposed to necessarily going to follow a genre of music, I feel.
I think one of the other things that's really awesome about Dunedin versus Melbourne is the age range at which you see people at Dunedin things.
Right.
Like there's a ton of you young hip kids and people into their 30s and 40s in most scenes of Melbourne music and stuff like that. But by the time you're hitting 50s, 60s, most of those people are like, that's the young kids thing, and they're all off in bed. You go to gigs in Dunedin, there is people from 18 to 70 at most of them.
Yes.
And they just keep coming out, and they're like half those guys are the guys who were there every week. You know what I mean? Just watching music. And
I have a story for that I've got to share. And it's not, I was actually in Austin, Texas. And for those who aren't sure, Austin has this remarkable scene of just wall to wall to wall. It's like your high street theory of Melbourne, where it's just wall to wall to wall of live music venues, all free. You walk in, you pay the bands directly, even through their tipping culture there. And it was 2 a.m. in a Denny's. And I was sitting down. I'd just been to about 4 gigs that one night in 4 different venues. And I sat down in a Denny's for what was our dinner at that time, and sat next to this 85-year-old pensioner who was sitting down with a newspaper circling all the gigs he was going to go to for the next week, because he was like, I'm retired. This is what I want to do with my life, is just go see music every night of the week. And he did that, and I was just like, that's kind of the life I'd like to live, the retirement I'd like to have. I'd just sit down in a Denny's, have a dinner, and just, well, that looks interesting. And I mean, he had one source where he was able to find out what every bar in the city was doing, which I thought was incredible.
Yep.
And having that opportunity of diversity of age groups, that people who enjoy music, is something that can be accessed by anyone, And he obviously felt completely safe, completely happy to go and explore wherever, all these venues were providing music.
We had 2 street publications, actually, and I heard Dunedin has had a few over the years before we got here as well. But we
Bring back Think.
we used to have Beat Magazine and Impress. I'm not sure if Melbourne still got them, but they were provided for free at the tram stops, and they were both just music-centric and arts and culture-centric street papers. But they every venue in the city who had any kind of musical performance had their week. And some of the bigger venues that have full pages and all that, but they just laid out everything that was going on for the week. So you just grab one of them on the way home, and that's how you'd plan. If you had a Friday night off or a Sunday afternoon off or a Thursday night off, you just, what's going on that day? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Is that an issue for Dunedin at the moment? Like, is communication of what's going on
I think
an issue?
The problem in that respect is that so many people lean on online stuff these days. And the problem with the internet versus a physical paper that's out in the public is that the internet's really good at showing people stuff that they're looking for.
True.
But if you're not actively looking for it, if it's not like a browsing culture.
No.
It's not like Google pops up and goes, hey, you're in Dunedin, do you want to check out these things? Like Facebook to a small degree does it, but it's so algorithmically inclined towards other things where people are spending money to direct eyeballs at it, that the chances of anybody who doesn't already know about your gig finding your gig is very slim.
Yeah.
And that's why postering is still an effective medium. And that's why, a couple of young kids who get around do most of the postering who are based at the Crown. But yeah, not based at the Crown, but they basically live at the Crown. Do a lot of free postering for a lot of the bands around town and stuff like that, because it's still the only really effective way to make sure you can actually catch anyone who's outside of your immediate circle.
Yeah. I learned this theory. If you want anyone to come to your gig, you got to tell them 3 times, and you got to tell them 3 different ways. So, you have a Facebook event, you message them and say, come to my gig, and then you put a poster up somewhere and they'll see a poster or a picture and go, right, I'm coming to that. And it's like, if you got to try and access 3 different ways to get them to go, I've seen that 3 times. Why do I feel like I need to go now?
I was just going to say another thing is that young people increasingly don't use Facebook. So I think we're not bad at the young musicians. Like a few of them are on the, partly to be on the Dunedin music page, and we're good at sharing stuff amongst each other. But as increasingly like the audience are not on that.
They're not.
Like on Facebook. They're not seeing those invites. So I do think that that's a danger if that's our solution in the future.
Well, and us remembering that any online or app technology is a fleeting thing. Like, I feel like they all have their little bell curve and they'll all come up, and it's as strong as they are when they're up, they'll be equally as strong as down when they're down. MySpace taught us that.
People have to have a range of solutions to that kind of stuff. A lot of the time when we've been talking to the DCC about promotion, about supporting local bands and that kind of stuff, and they go, well, we've got the What's On page. And you're like, yeah, but the What's On page is not really going to hit the demographics you're looking for. But the What's On page is crucial, because a lot of people who do things like go and see the DSO or the city choir or the, things like that, that is their space that they've been using to engage with that. So it's important. The standard print media like your newspaper and putting things in that's important, but also street mags and posters and every avenue of engagement where you can put the idea of live music in front of somebody's eyes as a viable way to socialize and spend your time, or just to get out of the house, just to go and do something, you know what I mean? Like, if you're sitting around on a Friday night and there's been no other option presented to you apart from what you found yourself, a lot of the times that's Netflix, because you can't be asked. And then you're just like, I'll see what's on Netflix.
And encourages a very antisocial community, I suppose, where our ideal Friday, Saturday night in, staying at home watching TV.
I think that's what so many of the musicians turn out to gigs. Because musicians play music and they're interested in music and they enjoy music and other people's music, and they work on it, and they like being out seeing other people play music. So they all go out. But if all musicians are just playing to musicians, we're not going to get very far.
No.
I think the other nice thing about the street mags in Melbourne, though, is often they would have gig reviews of local bands and album reviews of local bands. So often I would go see a band that I was pretty sure I'd like, even though none of my friends had seen them and I'd never seen them before, because someone had reviewed their gig and they'd made it sound like, that sounds like something and I would then go to their next gig. So I don't, because I think we're tending to capture people who already know the band.
That's it, kind of where it's like, and how do we get out of, and we talked about like clicks before, it's like, how do we get out of that culture of like, I'm a musician and I'll go see lots of bands, but I only see them because I'm a musician. How do we get people who aren't musicians but love music? Because I've talked with a lot of people who are like, a staff member that I work with at DNI was just talking about how much she loves music and loves singing. And upon interviewing her, it's like, do you go to gigs? No, I haven't been to a gig a local gig. How would I even go about that? She doesn't have that information accessible to her. And, that's a really interesting problem to address in terms of how do we encourage people to access that entertainment when there is so much going on, but it's so underground and so hidden from the public eye. Yeah.
Kids seem to be doing it themselves. These house parties seem to be massive down that way. Then all my students are just house party. You've got,
but undocumented,
doing like all the syrup boys kind of.
But undocumented too, because the only time, most of the time I hear they're putting on a house concert is when it's ended up in the police news because there's been, there's just so many people that they had to shut it down. Yeah. So.
The DCC, about 20 years ago, I think it was one summer or maybe 2 summers, every Friday lunchtime at 12:30, they put a local band on in the Octagon, playing live in the Octagon. It wasn't weather depending either. It was they had a sort of shelter thing and paid bands $120, I think it was, which was great for us. We played it at least once, twice maybe. And that's something I think they really should have carried on because it's open for everyone. If you don't like it, you can walk somewhere else. And kids, everyone can come and have a look and find out who the band is and where they're playing next. And
part of the biggest discussion about the pedestrianisation of George Street and the Octagon was actually because they wanted to be able to put up live performance places up and down the street and make it an easily acceptable thing. Now, whether the realities of that will occur, that's another conversation and something that's going forward. And I think the intentions were put in place there, and whether that will be successful will remain to be seen. But
it's not an abstract concept at all. Like Fed Square in Melbourne, that was a town square that was built on the side of the old gas and pipe works down beside the train line, because Melbourne didn't have a town square, and they were doing all their events in a courtyard of one of the hotels, all the big city events in one of the hotels, and they were like, "Well, we got this gas and pipes building; it's no longer used. We're going to build a town square there." Very controversial that they were building the town square there. The buildings were designed in such a way that was famously ugly, and then grew to become the character of the area, and now everybody loves it.
Yeah, kind of good ugly.
It's good ugly, but. That place is it's such an asset because when there's music happening in the middle of your city, you just get people walking past who just engage with it. And we'll have all the different community events throughout the year, and we'll have big Diwali festivals and the Japanese Summer Festival and the Polish festivals and all these things there, and they just be music and food and people, and people didn't even have to know what was going on. You just walked past and you heard stuff and you were like, wait, hang on, what's that? And then you go over and you'd have a positive experience just watching a couple bands in the middle of the day when you're on your way to something, And so I'm a huge advocate for using public spaces, and especially open public spaces as performance areas, because that's the very heart of a city in a way. Is that
well, and it creates
as simple as possible to put on those events. If you've got a place, then all the safety procedures are written down, and all of that stuff. And it's
the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
And I just know from experience that I've had people coming through a city like that, and if you walk through a main street where all of a sudden you've happened upon a festival of something for some reason, that's the lasting memory they're going to pull away from that city. In one moment, from the moment they get off the bus in the middle of town, and they're like, oh, and there was this festival on, it feels like that city is alive.
Yeah. You take what we've got coming up for the FIFA Women's World Cup. They've got a full week of fan festival stuff going.
Yeah.
It's inside the town hall.
Well, you don't see that, do you? It's not a part of it. Yeah,
it's all hidden away in this giant old blocky building that unless you're specifically going there to see that.
Yeah.
And you've got an event that's going to bring lots of visitors, national and international, to the city. Even if it is, not the best time of year, it does seem like it's worth the shot to do it outside where they're going to see it. So there's some things that we just don't approach very well, I think, down here.
I love Dunedin heaps, but I really love Dunedin. I was just it was a slow burn, honestly. But once I fell in love, like really committed. But I do wish that sometimes we would look to other cities and see things that have been effective, that have worked well, and be like, well, if it's shown to be effective and to work well in other cities, perhaps we could start exploring it here, because the city's going to change whether we want it to or not. We're going to move towards medium density housing. We're going to get bigger. So it's how we approach it, not whether we approach it. We can't stop it happening.
Exactly.
It's just about doing it well.
Yeah. So speaking of Save Dunedin live music, do you want to tell us just in a short synopsis about exactly what you guys are about? Is there anything happening? Is there some way that we can support the cause if need be? Because like a bit of context for those people who weren't aware, Fairleigh, you were playing a gig at a live music venue, and essentially what happened is they tried to shut you down. Dave, you were doing the sound at that time, and noise control, sound control came and decided to that they had a complaint.
It was the second complaint, but they refused. Okay. They refused to come back and speak to me after I got delivered the first complaint by the bar staff. They never came and spoke to me directly, and then I went outside and tried to call the number. It was on the little citation notice. Yes. Got a confused switchboard operator, and I tried to get her to bring whoever took the noise reading back so I could find out what was unreasonable about. It was a rather moderate level. It wasn't loud or anything. It's folky kind of
and you've seen
music.
Some loud gigs before, so I'm assuming you know what loud is.
This was my folk band.
I do this. I've done this for a living for 20 years, and I know there was nothing unreasonable about what we were doing. So I just wanted to have a discussion about what this was all about.
Yep.
And they refused to come back, and then told us if we just shut the bass off or shut the doors, and everything would be fine. And I was like, rightio. I think I've done the call. I've let them know that I'm kind of like proactively trying to solve this. We're just going to go back inside and do the gig. And then the next thing we know, they turned up with 8 police officers and four cop cars and the noise.
5 cars.
Scary.
8 police officers. So, and because I had been a folk gig, like our daughter was there and so on. So it was awkward. But the outcome of that was us starting this organisation. And so I wrote a very stern letter. Part of our concern was it turned out that they hadn't actually done anything wrong, because how things are set up and the systems here were such that it is hard to have live music in the city, because there are problems with how it's being.
So what are the problems with that in terms of why was it getting shut down if there was problems there? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. So one of the things that we would like to see as Save Dunedin live music is changes to the district plan. Hopefully we're seeing some with the upcoming variation. And one thing that we're going to see is a change in the acoustic insulation requirements.
Yeah, basically an upgrade on the decibel drop from internal to external. I can't remember the exact technical words off the top of my head at the moment, but basically we've got pretty low acoustic building insulation standards.
So that's the difference between how loud it is inside versus how loud it can be heard outside a building?
Yeah, and vice versa. Okay. So from another building, sound coming from the external to the internal and how much that has to drop by.
Okay.
As a building standard for basically.
So it's not just about keeping music in venues, but it's also about keeping everything. Keeping noise out of a venue or a residence.
Or keeping traffic noise.
Okay.
Or trucks driving down the road or anything. It's just it is a acoustic standard that is used to ensure comfort in people's homes. And it's particularly low and not particularly well enforced in a city this old. And that was one of the problems around that particular situation.
So that's going to be it's going to come up as something that they're intending to do in Variation 3. So that's coming up now, and that's largely because of our activism in this space. And that would mean that new buildings, it would be a 35 rather than a 30 decibel difference, which is quite big in terms of
but does that
sound.
Mean that there's a bigger emphasis on venues insulating their venues better? Or is there a balance between new builds and residences putting in more insulation?
So this is only the new builds in residential that have to increase the drop. So the requirement on the venue is just how loud it is at the boundary.
Yes.
And that's not going to change, because in Dunedin, ours is comparable to other cities. What's different to other cities is how much the developers have to drop the sound. So the problem is we have a situation where mathematically a venue can be meeting its requirements, but someone inside a building, it can actually be too loud for the requirements from our, national regulations, which are based on the World Health Organization requirements.
Yeah.
Like you're allowed to have a sleepable sleep room that you're sleeping in, and we're not arguing against that. So it's part of the council's obligations to mitigate those tensions in spaces where you're allowed to have both activities, where you can have residential and you can have entertainment.
And that's because, as per their zoning, they've basically said that these two things can coexist within this zoning, and then they haven't done the correct groundwork or enforcement or just figuring it out so that these things aren't
mediation between the two. Yeah,
they've just kind of buffed it in there with the bog standard 30 decibel and went, we want music and bars and we also want people living there and it'll all be fine, you know.
So that was a key issue as well with our concerns around the building going up next to the Crown, is that was something that came up there because we felt that perhaps, why weren't we notified? Why didn't they let us know that this building was going up? But actually that building had already met the requirements because reverse sensitivity is built into the 2GP. It's just it only requires this very modest insulation.
Yes.
So it's already built in. It's already being considered that, but it's not very sound. Like it's not going to mitigate adequately.
The noise levels is an issue that's surrounding live music living harmoniously within the residential gentrification of, we want people living in the centre city because it makes it a lot more convenient for a lot of people living and working in that area. We also want them to be comfortable, but we also want to have a vibrant, culturally exciting city that people will be able to enjoy a nightlife in, or even a day life, and have those sorts of things.
So I just wanted to say that we're part of Save Dunedin Live Music, but that's a collective which has people that represent from all areas of the music scene and in different roles. And also the things that we're working on right now is trying to push for a variation to the district plan, but also get a live music action plan in place. And we should be seeing that really soon. And we hope that the community will be able to feed back and say if they, want it to happen, if they want it to be resourced, but also if they want to see anything extra put on it. So people could get engaged when that's happening, have a look at it, see if it's covering all the things they want it to cover, and just be involved in that process. So that's going to be looking at things like rehearsal spaces, planning, a mid-sized venue, and more support from the council for the music community in Dunedin. So just wanted to push that.
And just sing out, we need, don't be quiet. Are there any other issues Dunedin is faced by in terms of how we can nurture and create a really vibrant cultural city going into the future?
Just firstly, with the planning, while we're going to see that in Variation 3, we actually want further discussion and perhaps an additional variation after the Live Music Action Plan, which Dave will talk about in one moment, because while having slightly better acoustic insulation requirements is one step, a lot of cities that have done really well with their music have gone further than that. So this is actually kind of like a basic requirement that most cities do, where is that increased acoustic insulation.
We've got ourselves to square one.
Yeah.
Yes. So what we'd actually like to see is what...
it's a chess game. Got a lot more squares to go.
So a lot of cities, and it can be done in different ways, but they basically make it that entertainment is prioritised. So this can be through agent of change principles, so that if you build near a music venue, it's on the developer to make sure that they are not going to impact on the music venue. Or you can have entertainment precincts, and that can be where in that area residential is discretionary. So if you're going to have residential, they have to show that it's going to not impact on the entertainment aspect. Both of these allow areas to develop where you can safely run music venues and they won't be impacted by noise complaints and so on. So we would like to go a little further than step one and actually try and, have spaces where you could kind of be like, I'm going to start a new venue, or
because I'm told this is not just a problem that's unique to Dunedin.
Not at all. I literally was in Auckland last week for the National Venue Summit, which is all the major venue holders from Auckland, Wellington, Nelson, Hamilton. There's a lot of this popping up everywhere as of late, as kind of the central government's given out directives to respond to the lack of housing in the country. So a lot of councils have had kind of the red tape removed around a lot of building consents.
Okay.
Because they've been given the go-ahead to go forward. But similar to Dunedin, there's not been a lot of considerations to the lateral impact of that.
It's that same problem, isn't it? It's about solving one problem to create another one, you know.
And I think in Dunedin, we kind of started on this road a bit earlier because we were already really on the back foot with our state of our venues. So the threat to one or two venues set our alarm bells whizzing. But I tell you right now, there's a number of venues in Wellington that have got townhouses and apartments going up to next to them. There's a block of 3 in Christchurch that have townhouses being built against their back walls at the moment. And these are the lifeblood of the entire touring music scene and their own scenes within their own cities. And it's all very much under threat now. And it's based on the same kind of laws.
But a key thing is, like with pedestrianisation, it's not like we're the first people to ever think about it and we can't possibly work out what could work or not work. So many cities went through this before. So we were in Melbourne when Cherry Bar, which is iconic, got shut because of noise complaints. And it was things like that, which is why Melbourne has the great agent of change laws. I'm not sure that we don't want something exactly the same in Dunedin, but we want to look at what would work in Dunedin to protect our venues in our city.
People and Dunedin cultures and New Zealand culture.
Absolutely. But London's gone through this stuff. San Francisco also has a great model.
City in Europe.
Yes. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just look at some good models and work them out here. But we also can't pretend it's not going to happen. Every city that has medium density housing in the city has gone through this issue because it just takes one neighbour.
Yeah.
One person.
Just a sad but fun note on the Cherry Bar thing. That's actually like Cherry Rock and Roll Bar on AC/DC Lane.
Right.
Literally the street is AC/DC Lane. Paying homage to, one of the most famous loud Australian rock bands.
Yeah.
And it's a rock and roll venue and they got shut down.
Technical note, have you got measurable levels yet? Because that was another big problem, wasn't it? You were going, what do I measure to? Or
we have, there's been a lot of work done with, and I will thank the DCC on this one, especially Ros McGill from the compliance and enforcement. She's the head of them. They definitely took a really hard look at how they responded to commercial premises and noise complaints straight after we started this work with them. And I don't think that they've actually had an actual visit to a venue that's had a complaint since. And now they're more opting for a mediation approach. I don't think they've got any of that specifically in writing yet, and we won't be completely happy until we do see a change in policy in writing, but at least they've stopped enacting that policy of arbitrary noise levels and subjective kind of things. And someone says it's that, especially when it concerns a commercial premises. They're still kind of acting that way for house parties and things like that because there's a lot of that in our city, as people know. Unitown, a lot of house parties.
It's almost had to.
It's had to because
that's
how the scene's adapted.
People are going to party and people are going to make music and
shut down starters. Yeah.
Well,
there's just that's house parties are a cheap, affordable alternative to and more dangerous alternative.
That's a learnt culture too, though. If you've got all these kids coming here straight out of high school, they're 18 years old, they hit Dunedin in uni, and they learn the thing to do for fun is to go to Castle Street and hang out in a flat and listen to drum and bass and get absolutely wasted, and then that is what they've learned. That is this is how we go out. These are the things we do. Because they've never had that good chance to learn how to do that within venues, or even a lot of them probably have never experienced live music. I know for a lot of the kids who come to the O-Week concerts and stuff like that at the uni, they don't even understand the concept of not asking original bands to play cover songs for them from the front row and stuff like that. They don't understand what kind of event they're at. A lot of them come up to me at the sound desk and ask me if they can request a song when there's a DJ on stage. You're like, oh, so these are all learned behaviours. These are things that
it's not a naivety. That's the wrong word. It's innocence, I guess. You know, it's a thing where you're experiencing something for the first time. Some guy's up there playing some tunes that you don't know, and you ask for something that you do know. It's
and that's the thing. If you don't offer up a good chance for these kids to learn how to engage with a music scene and see live music as the awesome kind of contributing
support it beyond
thing that it is.
Yeah.
Of course, you've always got the music students at the uni who just go that way, but the broader swathe of those young people. It's just a complete lost opportunity.
And from there, it develops a culture and an appreciation for what it is from there. Exactly. And that's why young people are so important to engage with in this particular, because they're the ones that are going to be enjoying the culture and art in the future. They're the ones that are going to be actually spearheading the whole thing. So having them on board and directing how the city embraces culture and arts, and in particular music, is really important, and getting them on side. So, if rather it might be a case of, let's not have it in your flat. I'll offer up this venue. You just bring your mates. You do what you want. Maybe not to within a safe environment, but you have that opportunity to make it yours. And I always did wonder when I was doing a lot of event coordination and promotion early last decade, that why there weren't a lot of kids coming out of the woodwork who were just organising events, because there were a couple that came out, and one was like Malakasa, for example, which did these amazing drum and bass nights, and they were packed and heaving with people. This is at U-Bar and the uni, Refuel and then U-Bar, and just heaving with people, loving it. Safe environment, big noise, everyone gets home safely. No deaths, as we've had, tragically in some of the house party approaches that we've had. So I think one thing we can be sure of is that this is a live music thing that is pretty much across the country that from the people that I've talked to. Yeah. So when we're talking about Dunedin here, the idea is that it's actually probably more systemic across the whole country. And I'd be very curious to know if it was systemic across the rest of the Western world or not. I don't know if Australia's had a similar sort of downturn, or even in Europe or places like that. The last sort of thing we wanted to talk about were unsung heroes that frequent these venues that we talk and love so much about. We put a lot of emphasis on the performers, and myself as a performer generally. Our unsung heroes, I think, our sound engineers need to be credited as that.
Some other unsung heroes are the amazing young posterers who get the word out about so many gigs, since that's not the most legal thing to do in Dunedin, and we don't have places that we can put up our posters legally, which is a problem. But that's amazing, that support running around at night, getting those posters up for people. What great kids.
And will not accept money for it. If you try to give them money or anything, you get told to fuck off, and they just say you should be helping people more. People need to help each other more, and that's their ethos.
The posterers are the first. I haven't heard this one before, about people who are going up and spreading the word for a gig.
Yeah, and they'll do it for, it doesn't matter if their bands are playing or not. They'll do it for, just bands who just need it to go up.
Good on you, people.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. You guys and that's where we want to this is our appreciation post for people who do that just for live music and that's a great wee thing.
And then you've got the other kids in town who run events a lot and put things together, like Happy Doom Dance Crew, do a whole bunch of stuff. They do Dankfest at the Crown and all that. Just those kind of community organisers. I know it's there's no money in promoting gigs at that scale at all, but they still relentlessly try to do it. Julie Dunn from Untrace Records.
Okay.
Also, they are the kids who are your Dale Kerrigans and your Coy Zillers and all those kids in everything. Do an awful lot of work within the community and around as well. Who else would I say? That's Jess Cavell does a shit load of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Brendan Christie. He's organised the Nook and Cranny, which we sorely missed this year.
Yes, we did. We're doing this instead. So
something I've really found, which is, I guess, it's not quite a venue thing, but and maybe it's right now having a teenager as well who's in Dunedin, is how much I think because Dunedin has such an amazing music scene and an amazing reputation, and so many people are involved in teaching who are also so accomplished themselves. Like Jay has had lessons or experiences with so many different people and just felt so supported and such an amazing quality of like music. So I think there are so many people who are working so much with our young people who are going to be the next bands coming through and the next people, you know, running events and that sort of stuff. I think that support for the young kids in Dunedin is strong, and I like it.
It would be so good to really jump on that and push it a little bit further too, in terms of how well connected our education side of things for music connects with the real world music scene. And, you know, I for one would love to see almost just your guitar teacher sits down how to play a few chords, and when they get to a certain level, it's like, I think you're ready to book your first gig. Let me show you how to do that. And having that opportunity as a young person would be absolutely mint, because I remember it's just something that could really be so beneficial to young people going forward.
One thing I'd like to see going forward is more support for some more kind of all ages type things in ways that, you know, can work for young people.
I always harken back to the freezer gigs back in Australia. We used to have freezer drug and alcohol free events, which was a government initiative and they just run everywhere. And they'd run through the outer suburbs and all the halls and all that stuff. Right. And they'd normally grab, you know, some mid-level successful bands or some bigger bands, and they'd whack them on a bill, but then they'd collect local kids from local bands from the schools and other areas around and put them all on a proper gig, proper PA, proper lights.
Great. Yeah.
And at all ages.
Proper show.
And they just do it on the weekends, and they do it every weekend, moving around the different suburbs of Melbourne. And lots of different ones running all at once as well, actually. So it was quite a big scene of underage gigs, and kids just went out to them. Especially when hardcore metal came through. God, they went crazy for that. So people like swinging their guitars around like crazy, and they all had merch before they'd ever played a gig. You couldn't read a single word of it.
Amazing. Yeah. We'll leave it there. Thanks, guys, for coming and talking with us. It's been an epic conversation, and you both have such a wealth of knowledge. And it's really a pleasure, and we're so lucky to have you advocating for live music in Dunedin. So thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us. Again, if you have any comments or questions that you want to pitch to Dave and Fairleigh, they have a Facebook page called Saving Dunedin Live Music, which you can look up to, or chuck them on wherever you're seeing this, and I'll happily pass it on. They may get sick of my voice if you're really into it, but I'm sure they'll appreciate anything you want to say, any ideas that you have, anything that you want to shout out appreciation to for people who work really hard in what is a small music scene is really, really appreciated. Any ideas that has sparked your mind to start thinking about solutions to problems that we have, just sing out. We need, don't be quiet. Be loud. Be noisy.
Loud.
Be very noisy.
Be very noisy.
Be loud. Yeah. The sound controls can't hurt you on that voice. Yeah. Please do. Just get motivated people, and let's make a really cool live music scene in Dunedin.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thanks guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yay.